Welcome to SOAPBOX. I am your host, Bruce, and this is episode 5. Now, we are still in season 4, so to those of you who've been listening, welcome back. I know we like to talk about the 1% in Trinidad and Tobago, but I want to talk to you about something even more serious, the 33%. Now, this is the percentage of the electorate that does not vote. Over the last 3 elections, voter turnout was 66.21% in 2007, 69.98% in 2010, and 66.86% in 2015. This gives us an average of about 67% electoral turnout from election to election. That means that about 33% of the population who are eligible to vote do not vote at the general elections. As a young person, I hope that you are not part of this group, but just in case you need a reminder, I'm here to tell you why voting is not only important, but also necessary. Now, some might argue that people, quote unquote, hate on non-voters, or that they feel like telling people to go out and vote is in hopes that the non-voter would vote for their party. That could not be further from the truth, and it is a base level view on the issue of non-voting. Non-voting is and will always be categorically and unreservedly an affront to democracy. Let me preface this, or let me put this in context. Citizenship is like a group project. So many of you've been in this situation before. How do you feel when, say, 5 people are in a group and only 3 bother to show up and do the work? Much less when the other 2 complain about the outcome, if bad, or they reap the same rewards, if good. Now, when some of the group members are committed to doing the work and showing up, and others are just along for the ride, how does that feel? Non-voting and voter apathy is beyond being fed up of the main political parties. It is a lack of political engagement. It is apathy with Trinidad and Tobago, not with UNC, not with PNM, not with PDP, PEP, MSJ, etc., etc. Because non-voters are not only not voting, but they are also less likely to form, say, a political party. Because non-voters don't advance political views if they're not even willing to engage in the political process. If they are disillusioned, right, by current politics or the 2 main parties, let's say, then the introduction of third parties from 2007, 2010, and even in the 2015 elections, we saw a number of third parties and independent candidates. Then we would have seen a marked increase in voter turnout with the illusioned or the disillusioned non-voter throwing their support behind these new parties, but that did not materialize. There is a huge difference between being an undecided voter and a non-voter. Now, the same way political parties prey on loyal voters, and the same way they pounce on the undecided voter, hoping to sway their choice, it is the same way they rely on non-voters. By withholding your vote, you play into the hands of one side or another anyway. And you've effectively already made a choice between the 2. Let me tell you a bit about voter suppression in this instance, because in addition to praying or relying rather on those who do not show up to vote, there are those actively seeking your apathy. There are those who are trying to promote people staying home. And now let me tell you, I looked at the Great Hack again recently, and I think that it is essential political viewing. And I'm not even about the politics of the situation in terms of the party, but according to the Great Hack, because this is an independent observer, so to speak, or an external observer, I should say, the target of their manipulations and machinations in the political arena was the youth. To try to increase apathy, they said it point blank and simple. They said it had to be non-political. This is their campaign. It had to be non-political because the kids, that's you 18 to 35. Kids don't vote, let me tell you one time, right? You, the young person, the youth, what of course they call you kids, the kids don't care about politics. It had to be reactive because they are lazy. That's what they said. That's what Cambridge Analytica said. So they generated a sign of resistance, the Do So movement, or Don't Vote, not against the government, but against politics and voting. And again, this is because they know, and this is not me saying this. This is an external person or entity. Because they know, and well, they've seen and they showed how a 40% difference in voter turnout between 18 to 35-year-olds could swing an election by about 6% or more. They understand the power of the vote, and that is why they use tools and campaigns to encourage you to stay home and not vote. So if you're not voting out of civic duty, at least you could vote out a bad mind. I don't know. Right? And do you think, let me ask, do you think that by not voting, you sent a message to either party? No. Who knows whether you were displeased or disillusioned or lazy, like the categorization of this external body. As one person put it, and I must agree, it has to be a level of laziness. And some people, they feel like the views or the position to blame the non-voter for being lazy is, again, a sort of, I guess, victim blaming, when in fact they're disillusioned by the parties, and the parties should be to blame. But if you don't know, we don't know whether it's laziness or disillusionment because you haven't registered a choice. And as I was saying, I have to err on the side of laziness because we see voting as a sort of end in itself, right? We go out, we vote, and that's it. And well, in the case of non-voters, you don't vote, right? But this could not be further from the truth. And again, I have a hard time believing that people who do not vote, that they engage at any level in the betterment of their community or country. I call this passive citizens. Because which leader of a community group, a community council, an advocacy organization, a grassroots movement, or any kind of altruistic activity, anybody actively engaged in seeking the interests of a group of Trinidad and Tobagonians, or Trinbagonians, I don't know why that was so difficult, but any group actively seeking the interests of people outside of themselves and outside of their household, I believe that they show up to the polls. Or perhaps it just means that this 33% prefers to be led by the 60-something, the 67% of the population, and led by their ideals and their views. And if so, then why complain about the 1%? Because you've sort of sacrificed or even silenced yourself, and you've done so, and your displeasure still has not been recorded. And if you prefer for only 67% of the population to make decisions, then why did we need universal adult suffrage in the first place? And so again, coming out of a system of historical oppression, we spoke about voter suppression before, right? A perpetuation of this kind of oppression. But now coming out of a situation of historical oppression, you still don't understand how hard fought this right to vote was, and why it should be preserved and given the kind of reverence, respect, and participation that it deserves. Because in 1945, again, not too long ago, the British Parliament granted us universal adult suffrage, limiting then the grant of voting, or they call it the franchise, to persons 21 years and over. Of course, we know since then, by about 1976, the Constitution of the Republic extended the franchise to persons attaining the age of 18 years. Right? So see how different our electorate would have been if A, the cap was still 21 years old, or B, if it was still limited to economic, income, and land holding rights. So in the 1930s, when the Butler riots were primarily about representation of the masses, and people fought for everybody, every adult, to be able to vote, you are willy-nilly giving it up and giving it away. It took years before this proposal of universal adult suffrage could even be discussed. And then even then, the committee that had been set up to consider the matter maintained that income and property qualification should be retained, even though it be reduced. Imagine if today we could only vote based on income or property qualification. Because if there's 33% of the electorate who is not interested in voting because ... and again, we don't know why, because your displeasure is not being recorded in any significant way, and the other 67% do as they may, then what would happen if we were to now circumscribe that and find a criteria that would match the 67% and exclude that 33%? Then all of a sudden people will be up in arms. And even when we look back at it, in the 1938 period or leading up to 1946, our first election held under universal adult suffrage, and it is, of course, before independence. I don't have to tell you that, but okay. When we look at that period, before universal adult suffrage, the population, then only 6.6% of the population was allowed to vote. Whereas when they expanded the franchise or the right to vote, 46% were able to vote. So if you don't care, if we were to revert to some criteria to be allowed to vote, then the voting population would undoubtedly dwindle significantly. And like I said, then, and only then, would we find people now clamoring to not only fulfill their right, but also to execute their responsibility. And even if you don't like choices, because again, I'm going based on, coming at some of the arguments for non-voting. Some people say they don't like the choice, but there is still a choice to be made. And if you don't see a choice to be made, then it means that you have not read the manifestos. You have not listened to the speeches. You've been asleep at the wheel for decades in this country, evidently. Because while I often say, I argue that there is no philosophical difference between the parties in Trinidad and Tobago. And when I say that, I mean, for example, you can see a marked difference in philosophy between, say, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in the US. There are philosophical lines that they draw in the sand, and one party supports this, another doesn't. So while there may not be any philosophical differences in terms of being more conservative than the next or whatnot, there are still practical differences. And I wouldn't go into that now because I'm not here to sway you on either side or the other. I'm just telling you, you need to pay attention. Because you're telling me you don't like the choices, and quite often people who say they don't like the choice because PNM this and UNC that and always only two parties. Now you have 19 political parties contesting this election. You have a choice. And again, it goes back to what I was saying before. Your apathy is not with party. Because if your apathy was with the two main parties, then when we see the development of third parties, the support of the non-voters, that 33% would have come out in support of something new, something different, and they did not. So let us be real. So when we come to the main parties, if that is the argument, they say they don't like choosing because, one side says, you're choosing between the lesser of the two evils. Doesn't make sense. Well, the lesser of the two evils, right, is better than the greater of the two evils. I don't know. I'm just saying. That means one is less pain. Or if you say, another element of it, which might make a little more sense, say, it's like choosing between two evils, that they're equally as bad. Well, let me tell you, right? This is probably not the first time that you've had to make a choice in your life between a rock and a hard place, so to speak, and not in a political sense. But let's say, on the one hand, you want to stay home and sleep, but you might lose a day's pay or you might lose your job. Now that's an evil. On the other hand, if you go to work, you might be tired if the issue is the hours, or you may be frustrated if there's something wrong with the company culture. So stay home and sleep, or go home and be rested. right? In the first scenario, you're rested, but you're broke, right? In the second scenario, you're paid, but you're tired or frustrated. And so I think by now you get my analogy. And I don't have to explain critical thinking and logical theory and weighing your options, right? I'm saying that in that situation, as well as in politics or political decision making, you have within you the capability to weigh your options and make a choice. Lastly, consider this as well, that your apathy may be misdirected. At times, the views and issues people express are not a frustration with an administration, which is the political party itself, right? Or the people within the party, particularly the leader, which is why we have a let's say, a Pandey-led administration and a Manning-led administration. Sometimes it's a frustration that has resulted from our governance structures, which have been set up from colonialism to now. And this is a much more lengthy discussion that I've been alluding to for some time now, where citizens have not had the information necessary to understand or distinguish between an administration, government, and governance in terms of the systems, the rules, the norms, and the actions, because sometimes we look to the administration, for policy and policy overtures, which is why we have manifestos. But we rely on government, the ministry level, say the PSs or whatnot, and those technocrats within the ministries and government agencies as well. And then we also have to rely on the governance systems, the interaction between administration and government agencies, and the interaction between stakeholders and citizens, because we are part of governance. And sometimes it is our lack of interest and, like I said, lack of engagement why governance is still the same, government is largely the same and unaltered, and why administrations come in, right, without altering government and governance. I hope you're following me, right? And, this is, like I said, a lengthier discussion. Maybe now is not the time, but you are selecting an administration, but your government and governance has been predetermined and largely unaltered, which is why we need all hands on deck for our group project, as I call it. Some of these changes require referendum, where you will be required to vote, or you'll be asked to posit your views. So is it that you are not going to vote? Some of these changes, these deeply entrenched systems, need to be changed or require joint action for change by all parties, requiring a special majority of parliament. But civic engagement is nonetheless necessary, and the quickest way to determine something is by poll. And elections, general elections, local government elections, or a referendum is a poll, right? For me, non-voting means that there is a mass of people unwilling to take action but always ready to complain. It suggests that they are complacent about our future and comfortable leaving things up to chance. They are always, often, or they are more than likely the first to say, well, I never vote for that, but you didn't vote against it either. And that kind of passive citizenship, as I call it, is partly why moving forward as a country is so difficult for us. So to me, and I think to many, those of us who feel like it's an affront to democracy, and those of us who feel so strongly about going out and voting, it's not about convincing somebody to vote for one party or the next. People earnestly encouraging you to vote do not care who you vote for. We want you to care enough about your country, about our collective future, to go out and vote, to participate, to read and to be informed, and not just at election time, right? We want you to care enough to make a decision. Because come August 11th, or the day after the polls, we will still have a country. We will have a government, some government or administration. You will still be a citizen. you will be led by that government. And we will still need all hands on deck in this group project of building our country. The most effective way for you to get on your soapbox is if you go out and you vote.